So there's the board. Right. So I want to look at two endings. Partly, this first one, by the way, is one where people in the past have asked me about it. Okay, let me just do a little backstory. So this was a tournament like 2005 in Reno, and it was like the last round. If I'd won the thing, it would have been kind of, a little bit of money and pride or whatever. And my opponent here is Alexander Strapunsky, very strong player, GM, and was in contention right around that time for the U.S. Championship, where Naka ended up winning. I think beating him in the last round like 2004 and it's 2005. So so Yermo was at this event, and Yermo, is really an endgame expert, and likes to make fun of GMs when they don't get their endings right. And this endgame was really painful because I had studied this endgame quite a bit before, but when it came to the board, I didn't know what was really going on. Let me just give a brief overview of this endgame. If this pawn is advanced one square further, it's a draw. And notice, it's important that the bishop is on the opposite color of this queening square. If it's on the same color, it's possible for white to win. Funnily enough, Strapunsky didn't know at all anything about this position, but black doesn't need to know anything. He just needs to, scramble in the pocket. So one of the reasons I'm bringing this ending up is, this was like hour 5 that we're fighting it out in Reno. Very long, old school time control in Reno. And yeah, it's tough. And like the other thing about this position that I have a really strong recollection of is when me and Josh Fidel and David Pruse and Vinay Bott, Sam Shanklin were living at the GM house in California. Me and Vinay one day were looking at this position and, without any clocks or whatever, and I still couldn't get it right. I still couldn't get this freaking position right. Okay, let me just roll through it and show you what happened. So the first thing you got to do is get the king out. So step 1. Then you bring the rook over. So you've cut the rook off. So that, so far, so good. Now, the problem is as follows. White needs to get his king now back here without letting this king come over here, right? So if we go one move back and I play king b5, well, then the king gets back into the pocket, and then I got to do the whole thing all over again. And you can see how is the king going to get back? So this is a standard situation, and you can easily see as well that if the pawn were back here, it would be a little bit easier because then the king could march through this square and come around. Once you come around, then the pawn can advance, and there's really nothing that's going to stop the pawn from advancing once you've got that. Okay, so here we go. King c7, rook b1, king c8, rook b7, bishop f2, and rook b5. I didn't have any idea what I was doing, and we ended up going around and around. One thing, just in terms of improvement, that I think is important is it's not good enough to solve it once at home. There's some level at which you need like deep training in the position, and I've watched Yermo talk about this position, and honestly, his way of doing it is too hard. Okay, so I'm just going to share with you my way of doing this thing, and then that's all I need to know, and that's all I want to know. The similar thing with like bishop and rook versus rook. I think I have an understanding of how to play with the rook. There's different ways of doing it. I just want to know one way. I do not want to know other ways of doing it. And maybe at some point I'll talk about that on the show too. That endgame, by the way, is also very frustrating to me, where I feel like I'm not sure I get it if I'm playing the white side. I did win that position once against GM Brian Smith, but that was just a time scramble and we're moving around like idiots. I didn't have any clue as to actually what I was doing. Okay, so anyway, let me show you my method. Rook b3, and now he's got some zugzwang where if, for example, the bishop comes here, let's just put that on the board, you can go here, and then I win the bishop, right? So I'm out now. He's not allowed to come back in. And so really king c7, and now we play king a5, and this is a great zugzwang method where there's just, it's really kind of, and the key thing is this. It feels anti-intuitive because you're like, he's just going to check you, dude. He's just going to check you, dude. But now what happens is this funny thing where we cut him off from this diagonal. and then he can't get back anymore. And that's the key thing to remember, honestly, is that he has to be able to stay on that diagonal. Also, if you're defending, that's a key thing you have to know. And just to show it, it might seem weird that it's now over, but it really is. Like king b8, and there's actually a variety of moves to do here where I'm going to be looking to play king b6. But the key is we're not letting him back. For example, rook f3 is a good move. And we can now push the pawn. We're going to be looking about king b6. Yeah, even that you can imagine getting a little bit hectic. So king a5 and bishop d4, we again do king b5, right? And then we have king c4, so that's not going to work. And yeah, that's kind of it. That's kind of it, because on king c8, then we go rook b5, right? And then it's really toast. And I believe on king c6, this is where it gets a little tricky. We still play rook b5, and the point is now if he checks, he's in danger of getting cut off, of coming back. And if he does come back, we can tag the bishop and then smush the king, push the king out away from our business, totally winning. And this is never going to work because we can just zook swung him out, and he's going to have to leave the c file, right? And then we can march the pawn without any problem. Not a fortress. A good example though of a fortress is if we go back, and if in any of these positions, if I had played a5, then black has a fortress. There's no way through for white. And Guillermo the funny story is talking like some old school American GM, and he was just like, "Of course you just push the pawn. Give me a break. Push the pawn." But that's the intuitive thing, and I knew at least not to do that. But no, that's not a good situation. All right, let me show you another one, another very painful one.